So let's talk about transformation of the company. And as there are many triggers of transformation, why a company needs to transform, let's start with the technological driver and see that transformation from a board perspective. An obvious answer is because board is designed to be distant from early signs or from weak signs. And this is not accidental, it's designed in that way. So boards operate through aggregated information, through formal reporting, through metrics which are backward oriented. Meanwhile, the disruption, the technological disruption, emerges in the details. So, for instance, early customer behavior, which is changing, or margins which are becoming unattractive, or even competitors outside the mainstream. So those signals appear first inside the organization at a lower level. And it also those signals you can also see at the edge of the market. So those signals are not part of the board pack. Well, no, not primarily. The real issue is not the technological literacy. It's more the understanding of the business model and the deep understanding of the business model. Because in order to see the disruption early, you must understand how value is created, where you protect your margin, how you protect your margin, and very important to understand which assumptions underpin the strategy. Boards have often a very deep and very broad experience, but sometimes is from the current version of the industry. Meanwhile, when we talk about technological disruptions, we are looking many years in the future. I would say that disruptions never attack the obvious. For instance, you can see that, as I said before, at those non-core customers or in segments with a lower margin, or even in unfavorable parts of the supply chain. So these are signs and signals which from the board level might be irrelevant. But inside the organization, deeper in the organization, these signs are creating attention, and they are definitively an entry point. And that's why it is important to have that inside information I was talking about. The supervision depends on the management-defined reality. So the role of the board is to challenge, to validate, to approve, but rarely to explore. So this works very, very well in stable environment. But if you have a fast-moving technological context, it creates a structural lag, or it might create a structural lag. So by the time it is visible at board level, it often becomes already strategic. My answer is yes, if this involvement is confused with management, or even worse, with micromanagement. Because board must not run the company, but board must govern the future of the company. And in disruptive environments, if you have a very strict distance and the boards are not involving themselves, that can turn into a passive risk, as I see it, or it's a risk acceptance, a passive risk acceptance. So for me, the question is not whether the board should engage. It's more, of course, how they engage without crossing operational boundaries. Well, the first step is for me to acknowledge that there might be a structural blind spot when it comes to see disruptions and technological disruption at early stage. So if you have that acknowledgement, you shift the conversation from, blaming to more to design. And if the board assumes that it might be a blind spot or it might be a lag by default, then they can build mechanisms to compensate for this lagging. For me, an obvious answer would be embedding it in the risk assessment and more in the risk assessment as in the risk architecture. So it should appear, for instance, clearly and explicit in a risk heat map, but not as an IT risk, more as a strategic risk with potentially existential impact. And the question is, of course, if the heat map is sufficient as an instrument, and I think no, it is not, because risk often in the heat map, it's defined, it's the product of probability and impact, and when it comes to technological disruption, very often the probability is low in the beginning, and of course the impact is high. So I think that you need to use that instrument, but also to add a lot of strategic discussions on scenario-based discussions, because that would the question would be then what will fundamentally change our economics, or even better, to put the question, what assumptions, if proven wrong, will break our strategy. In my opinion, it's not about taking the board on a R&D roadmap necessarily, or trying to showcase technological demos. For me, it's more about the concentration around the competitive dynamics. For instance, what startups would target our most profitable customers? Or which competitor would accept margin levels which we cannot accept? Or which technology would lower the entrance barrier into our core business? So the focus should be not on the novelty, it should be more on the economics. I think it's always important to go back to what I said before, that engagement of the board on different levels and with different stakeholders. It's about completing the information, triangulating the information if you want. And you can do that either with external experts, founders of business, but also very, very important, what I said also before, to have in mind the customer's perspective. And of course, always market-based indicators. So if you let the disruption enter the boardroom through the management slides, then you can be sure that it comes late. Yes, I think so. At least this is my experience in the boards I have seen. Because the financial review, first, it's mandatory, but it's also very concrete. While the strategic discussion feels sometimes abstract and also inconclusive. Yet, for me, the competitive positioning of the company is precisely what we should discuss at board level, because it's where the disruption shows up first. So boards often spend much more time on reviewing last quarters than discussing about the next 5 years. Well, for me, it's about the time you spend, the repetition, because it's not something you talk once a year, and also to challenge the competitive positioning of the company, because that can really change, and if you catch up the early signals, that will definitively change the competitive position. So it's not something you are talking once a year. It's something which you should have on a regular basis as a conversation point. For me, it's to say that boards don't miss technological disruptions because they are complacent. It's more they miss because of the governance system, which is optimized for a stable environment and not around that inflection point. The task of the board is not really to predict the disruption, but to ensure that the organization is not structurally blind to that.